Oops.
Hello.
My name is Logan Reed. I'm an assistant dean of admission at William and Mary. And this is Professor Lou. If you want to go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Matthias Loy. I'm in the Department of Biology. I'm also the Director of Data Science, and I've been at William and Mary since 2009, and I came from the West Coast, actually, from Idaho. I was a research ecologist there for the USGS and dealing with endangered species such as the sage grouse. So I'm basically by training spatial ecologist.
Yeah, so there's definitely a lot of experience there, and it'll be really cool to see his lecture and everything for the next hour. I just wanted to, first of all, congratulate you all on getting accepted to William Mary. We are so excited to possibly have you on our campus in the fall, especially as a Monroe Scholar. It's just a great honor. And so, yeah, we're super excited for you all. And if you have any questions throughout, feel free to ask Professor Lou. He'll be the one running this lecture and everything. And yeah, so just congratulations to you all. And I hope you all have a great time with this lecture, this mock lecture. And I'll just hand over the reins to you.
Thank you. So welcome everyone. And also I extend my congratulations to you. If you wouldn't mind, please turn on your video. Otherwise, I'm talking to myself. I would really appreciate that. I talk to myself a lot, but I don't want to do it for the next 50 minutes. So please turn your video feed on. That way you actually can see if you raise your hand or whatever you might have questions. So feel free to interrupt. And I'm going to post some questions to you. This is going to be interactive. So stay tuned. And the mock lecture is basically a lecture I just taught about a month and a half ago in the second course, the Intra-Course Biology 204, that actually all of the pre-meds have to take. ENSP, Environmental Science and Policy majors take this class. We have neuroscience majors take this class. So it's actually across the board. So what I'm going to talk to you about today is behavioral ecology and how it meets evolution. Okay. Let me share my screen here. And then we get going here. So first of all, we actually have a whole suite of faculty that are engaged in behavioral ecology. Most of ecologists and evolutionary biologists are heavily engaged in behavioral ecology. And I think personally, it's one of my favorite topics. That's why I chose this mock lecture, because it spills over into humans as well, right? We can do behavioral ecology of humans. And I'm really interested in birds and mammals. And so they show fascinating displays of behavior. So I think since my early childhood, I was always kind of a behavioral ecologist. So what is behavior? Any thoughts? How would you actually define behavior? What is it? There's this rule I learned as a starting out faculty that it takes the human mind about 8 seconds to process a question. And let me tell you, when you stand in front of 220 students and nobody speaks up, 8 seconds is a very long time. So any thoughts? How would you define behavior? Have you heard about this in your AP biology courses in high school, or any thoughts on this? So it is simply a response to a stimulus, right? The stimulus could be from your parents, right? You show behavior towards your parents. It could be when it rains outside, you show behavior up because of the environmental stimulus. And so this is what we're really talking about today is how has evolution shaped behavior and what are some ways we can actually think about it. So this fish here has behavior because it interacts with individuals of the same species, mating, aggression. This fish also interacts with the environment or the habitat, seeks shelter, needs food, obviously. And then this fish also has behavioral ecology in movement. So daily movement patterns, annual movement patterns, right? Some species actually migrate, others stay within the same area. And then this fish also disperses, and dispersal is defined as a one-way movement, basically from the place where an individual is born to where it actually ends up breeding for the first time. That's what ecologists define as dispersal. And then lastly, as we already discussed before, there are environmental stressors. This could be anthropogenic originated, which usually is Not very good for the fish, particularly if we dump in toxic waste into this river. But environmental stresses could also be irregular patterns of weather, right? Or just the annual fluctuation of temperature or rainfall regimes if you're or a individual in the desert. So all these stimuli basically ultimately has can be summarized as behavioral ecology. So this species has behavior. So in this biology 204 class, we really start out with the big pictures and always go back to it. So how does a given lecture actually fit into the big picture? So this course is about evolution and ecology. And I know this diagram has way too many pieces in there, but it tells you a little bit about how everything fits together. So as ecologists, we're really interested in sort of the spatial scales, dimensions. You could also think of it as temporal scales, so time. Basically, the x-axis here in this graph shows time and space. And then there is some hierarchical ordering, right? We go from ecosystems all the way down to genes and molecules. So biology 203, which is molecular cell biology, goes up from molecules all the way up to cells, dabble a little bit in organisms. And then biology 204 is going up from the organism all the way up to the ecosystem. But ecology interacts with evolution. And as you probably learned in high school, there are 4 forces of evolution. There's selection, genetic drift, flow, and mutation. And there's a direct feedback from sort of the ecology into the phenotypes that actually are highly fit. And that feeds back into the wheel of the continuous spinning wheel of evolution. So they're tightly interconnected. And that's what we're trying to say with this, or to show or demonstrate with this graph here. And behavioral ecology is basically the effects on the phenotype. So if a certain behavior is adaptive, it increases, for example, reproduction in this fish, then this phenotype will be selected for, right? But that phenotype is also influenced by other species, by predators, and by the environment. So clearly evolution and ecology work together hand in hand. This is what we're trying to say. But it gives you a good sort of representation of what you would learn in this course in Bio 204 if you're an aspiring pre-med or biologist. So behaviors can be innate. So there's no learning involved. It's we express that behavior automatically. So yawning is a classic example, as this cute bunny shows up there. The other one that's shown, the weaving of a web by a spider, is also innate. And then some ritualistic mating behaviors, as this beautiful display by this paradise bird, are also innate. Can you think of human behaviors other than yawning that are potentially also innate? Can't be quiet with me. This is how we teach at William & Mary. You have to participate. Any thoughts? There's no right or wrong answer here. Just go for it.
Was sneezing be?
Yeah, sneezing. Yeah, Sarah, absolutely right. Right. We don't think about, oh, I need to sneeze. Right. So it's a physiological response. How about some fears? Do we have innate fears? Anyone else? What do you think? Fear of snakes.
Bugs.
Bugs, spiders, right? Absolutely right. Height. Yes, height. Very good. I like this. So last year I walked in the Appalachians, and out of the corner of my eye, I saw this coiled up rattlesnake right next to my foot on a trail. And I immediately jumped. That's a classic innate behavior. I did not think, oh, I should jump now. That was just get away from the snake. Ever since then, I'm not wearing Tevas anymore in the Appalachians. I guarantee you that one. That snake actually rattled, but I couldn't hear it because it was next to a creek. Beautiful animal. So that was fun. Anyway, so there are innate behaviors, okay? And they're basically automated, they're inherited. So there are alleles that actually code for this behavior, right? And that's inherited. So quite often we think about innate behavior as not complex, they're just behaviors, right? But in fact, they're really important in many organisms. So for example, in plants, we know now that plants actually, if they're attacked by an herbivore, that could be caterpillars or deer or whatever have you, they actually release a volatile chemical, which then is picked up by the neighboring trees or plants. And those plants actually increase their herbicide, basically herbicides in their growing tissues. So for example, caffeine, as you probably know, is an herbicide, right? It's a natural herbicide against herbivory. So plants actually have behavior too. It's innate. So if they're attacked by an herbivore, they will actually release volatile chemicals to warn the neighbor. Watch out. There is a bad kid in town. So better increase the chemicals that will deter the herbivore from eating your growing tissues. Another one is actually masting. So you might have heard about this. This is very common out here on the East Coast, where oak trees all release acorns all at once. And that doesn't happen every year. So on this graph here on the x-axis, and I know this is not well done, I would have probably put the years vertically so you can actually read it. From 2002 until 2012, they looked at the beech nuts. So beech actually release sporadically lots of seeds. And then you can actually nicely follow the population size of mice. So they really benefit tremendously from when the beech actually release their nuts. And the reason for that is to basically oversaturate the availability, because the mice cannot eat all the seeds, right? They're actually predator of seeds. So thereby there's a higher survival that some of the seeds actually make it. And that masting event, again, is an innate behaviors in trees, and it's actually regulated by volatile chemicals. There's some really fascinating communication pathways in trees, and one of them is actually through fungi in the roots. So we talk a lot about this in class as well. So again, behavior is not just, what we typically think of vertebrates. It actually occurs in plants as well. And then here's really a good one. So mating strategies in earthworms. Yes, they're brainless, but not clueless. And so here's a perplexing study. Let's walk through this graph here. So on the x-axis, we have the recipient body mass. So as you probably know, earthworms actually are hermaphrodites. So they are both sexes in one individual, but they still have sexual reproduction. So the recipient is basically the individual that receives the semen from another earthworm. So that's plotted on the x-axis. And on the y-axis is basically the volume of sperm delivered. So what do you make of this? So we have basically two symbols in there. One is a full circle. That's for when there are two donors. So there are multiple earthworms mating with an individual, and then there's a single donor, and that's the open circle. So what do you make of this? How do you read this graph? What's your conclusion? There's a lot going on in here, isn't it? So the line shows the average, right? The average association between the recipient, so the semen recipient body mass versus the volume delivered by the donor of the semen. So let's just look at the one donor. It's pretty much a flat line, right? So the volume of semen delivered is more or less the same. Doesn't relate to body mass at all. Would you agree with me on that? All right. So if an earthworm somehow, I don't know how they figure this out, has to be probably chemical cues. If a semen donor actually gets the cue that the recipient of its semen is actually already made it, it will actually increase the volume of semen delivered. And that's actually adjusted by the body mass. So why would that be? Yes, Grace, you don't need to raise your hand. Just feel free to chime in here. This is open.
Okay, maybe like if they're sensing that it already is reproduced, then they think like it would be more successful, so they'd want to mate with that one.
Yeah, you are right on track. So there's actually two things going on here. Absolutely, Grace, you're right on track. So this is what's called sperm competition. So if a semen donor actually realizes that the semen recipient already has semen inside of its body, it will release actually more to sort of increase the competition of fertilization of the eggs. And so if you release more semen, right, it's just simply a probability game, as if you were to go to Las Vegas, you increase your chances that your semen actually fertilizes an egg. And then what's also really interesting about it is that the heavier the body mass is of a recipient, the more fit an individual is. So therefore, they're probably producing more eggs. So in that sense, not only does a male inject more semen because of sperm competition, but also just the semen content, based what Gracie already said, that larger individuals are more fit, they have more eggs, and therefore more semen is needed to fertilize all the eggs. So next time when you look at an earthworm, yes, they seem clueless, but they're not brainless. They know exactly, they seem brainless, sorry, but they're not clueless, can go either way. And so this is a really fascinating behavioral ecology paper on innate behavior. Very fascinating. So I definitely look at earthworms differently now. All right, so we talked a lot about innate behaviors, and now we talk about learned behaviors, okay? And learned behaviors is a conditioned response. So there is a stimuli, and an individual learns how to either respond positively or negatively to that stimulus. It's highly flexible, right? Depending on the stimulus that is elicited. It could be a low intensity stimuli or a high intensity stimuli. So the behavior, the response to it is highly flexible. And the capacity to actually learn to respond to a stimuli is inherited. So there's still alleles there, right, that actually enable us to learn. And some behaviors are absolutely phenomenally amazing how individuals learn from others. And I'll bring up some examples now. So a really good one here is actually this crow here. That's a Macedonian crow that actually uses a stick to get to the bucks in the wood. So it can't reach it with the bill. So it uses a stick to probe. And then actually the stick has a little hook on it and it removes the grub out of the tree. So if everything goes according to plan, I'll play a YouTube video how this crow actually gets the right size of stick to get a treat. So this is done in the lab. So watch this. It will have no sound, so just watch the crow. So here comes the crow. Checks out all the tubes. Oh, there's a stick, right? But the treat is hidden right down here. So it could tell with the stick, it can't get to the treat. All right, now it gets a bigger stick. Probes it in. Nope, still not long enough. Goes to another tube. Gets out even a longer stick, and now it can actually get the food. So not only do these crows actually have an ability to learn how to use tools to get to food, but they also have sort of this three-dimensional thinking to actually relate the length of the tool to where the item is located that they try to retrieve. So this is really an example of amazing learning ability. All right.
This beachfront Verbo is about to become
hang on a
part of
sec.
an unforgettable vacation memory. The moment with so much anticipation and maybe
Little
just
commercial here. Let me turn that feed off so it's not coming back on again. All right, on we go. So learned behaviors, we know that, right? We learn from mom and dad, we learn in school, we learn from our friends, very common in humans. We're not the only ones here. These cute little ground squirrels here actually have a vocabulary of warning calls that they learn from their parents. So they elicit a different vocalization when a bird of prey comes in and tries to eat them versus a snake. So clearly, there's not an innate behavior, it is learned. And then here's another example of tool use. Chimpanzees use sticks as well to get food out of the termite hives, right? There are actually stories of crows in Japan that take clams, fly to a red light, sit on top of the red light, and wait until the light turns to green, because then traffic will come, and then they drop the clam on the road, and the tires will open up the clam, and so that's basically getting them access to the muscle tissue. So there's a lot of examples of learning in other organisms than excuse me, than humans. So in order for us to actually wrap our heads around evolution and behavioral ecology, there's a really nice framework that was actually put forward by Nicholas Tinbergen. You might have heard from Konrad Lorenz. Have you heard from Konrad Lorenz? Have you heard about imprinting? That actually goslings, when they come out of the egg, they follow the first object they see. So that could be a ball, it could be a human, and obviously goose mom, right? But so these three actually are the only ones who won a Nobel Prize in behavioral ecology so far. So these three came up with a sort of a conceptual framework on how we can look at proximate factors that influence behavior. So that's the how question. How is this behavior orchestrated and elicited? And then secondly, the ultimate question, the why question. Why is this behavior evolutionarily important? And so this is a framework to think about the mechanisms of a behavior versus the evolutionary forces that shape behaviors. So within proximate factors, there are two sort of sub-questions, the causation, and so that's the mechanism, and then the development or the ontogeny. So the behavior actually develops in the lifespan of an individual, right? As we know from our own learning behavior, we actually learn language from our parents. And in many other organisms, that is the case as well. So that's what is meant by development. And then within the ultimate questions or factors, there's a function. What's the function? Why is this behavior important? And then lastly, what's the evolution of it? Do other species that are closely related with the organism that we study also exhibit that behavior? Can that be traced back to an ancestral group of species that also had that behavior? So this is really the sort of the pretty much the standard approach of studying behavior. And let's look more into this, because it's not always easy to assign what is the causation or development versus the evolution or the function. So the proximate factors, or the how factors, can be genetic, neurological, hormonal, skeletal, muscle, molecular interactions, you name it. And then the ultimate, the why questions, is the evolution, right? What's the evolutionary history? What's the evolutionary consequence? And when we're thinking about the evolutionary consequence, we need to go way back to Darwin, right? Darwin's theory of evolution. And there are basically four postulates. That behavior is inherited. There's variation in the behavior, right? Not all individuals exhibit the same behavior. There are more individuals born that can survive, and those that survive show the sort of the optimal level of a behavior. And so that this allows us then to create these behavioral graphs here, where we have on the x-axis, we have a trait value or a behavior, from high to low, from small to large, you name it, that could be any dimension. And then on the y-axis, we have fitness. So fitness could be reproduction, it could be survival. And then we can actually look at the association between the intensity of a behavior or the expression of a behavior versus the fitness. And clearly, if there is a higher value that influences fitness, this higher value, in this case, you're selected for, and that's called the adaptive state, because the higher value in this association here equates with a higher fitness. So if you think about the peacock, there's really good empirical support that tail length actually increases the fitness of a male. So the longer the tail, the higher its fitness. So that's a classic behavioral graph that you would create, where you put the tail length on the x-axis and you're looking at mating success on the y-axis. And the adaptive state is that males with longer tails have more copulations. So that's a good example for that. There could be a negative association where the adaptive state is actually a smaller value. So for example, on islands, we find quite often that mammals become smaller. And the adaptive state is for smaller individuals in a population of a given mammal species. And that has simply to do because there's less area available, right? We can't have these giant elephants. For example, elephants have been found on many islands. They are now extinct, like including Sicily. There used to be an elephant there, and they were tiny, itsy bitsy elephants because Sicily is not that large. And there could be also an adaptive state at the mid value of a trait. And this is a classic example of human birth weight of babies. If baby is too large, then there are complications during birthing. It might actually be that both baby and mom dies. And if baby is too small, there might actually be complications for survival of the baby. And so there is a selection for a mid value, sort of an optimal weight that maximizes both survival of mom and baby. So this approach of using evolution is to look at what is its current function. And that's really the data that we collect to basically explain why is this behavior adaptive, okay? Does that make sense? Any questions about this? So let me ask you this, how many of you actually talked about evolution in high school? You had it? Great. How many lectures were devoted to evolution? 1, 2, 3, 5 minutes? I come to find out that when I do a survey in my intro biology courses, that ecology and evolution are, squished together within 1 week or so, and the rest is all molecular cell biology. By all means, that's very important, I agree. But once you actually take higher biology, you realize that even modern medicine and molecular cell biology is all interconnected, how the organism interacts with its environment, right? So it makes sense to look at both ends. All right, so moving on then, here's an example where we now can apply Tinbergen's 4 questions to this behavior in fruit flies. So there are 2 types in fruit flies in the larvae stage. Some of them are rovers and some of them are sitters. So rovers are exploring basically the petri dish, right, where the food is located here. And the darker circles basically show where the food is, and the rest is agar, which is just the media. So there are rovers that kind of explore the food patches, and then there are sitters. Once they find a food patch, they're sitting there and eat the food. So when you look at the movement behavior of these caterpillars here, of the larvae, you will actually see that the rover has much longer trails to find new food patches than the sitter does. The sitter is pretty much just restricted to the food patch itself. But if you look at this in agar, then all of a sudden, both the rover and the sitter actually have these long forays to find food. So really the behavior here is limited to whether or not a given individual finds food. If it's a sitter type, they will stay in that food patch. If it's a rover type, they will chow down some food in that patch, but then move on. So how can we apply Tinbergen's 4 questions to this behavior, rover versus sitter? And this is pretty neat here. So what are the mechanisms? Well, in this case, actually, thanks to molecular biology, we actually know the gene that codes for either the rover versus the sitter, 2 alleles. FORR stands for foraging rover, and FORS stands for foraging sitter. So there are 2 alleles that basically code for the behavior. So that's basically the causation, right? That's the first question, the how question. Is there any ontogeny in that? It might be that this behavior is not expressed initially when the larvae hatch from the egg, that maybe at a later stage in the larval stage, they start to become rovers and sitters. So there could be some behavior in terms of development. So why does this behavior actually exist? What is the evolutionary advantage of being a sitter versus a rover? If you look at a normal population, there are about 70% are sitters and 30% are rovers. And you can tell this by just plotting out a frequency distribution of the foraging trail. So in green, we have rovers, and in purple, we have sitters. On the x-axis, we have the foraging trail length. And on the y-axis is basically the count, or the number of individuals that have similar foraging forays, in basically the length. So you can tell that for the sitters, the great majority, over 65 of the individuals, have about five centimeters of a trail. And then for the rovers here, it's a little bit all over the place, but on average, most of them are 16 or greater. So there's a clear difference in terms of the length of foraging forays, as we've already shown. So why is this adaptive? Well, food availability determines the proportion of rovers versus sitters. So if food is abundant, we would expect what? You look at the population right on the trait value now down here, we have food availability. In this case, food availability is abundant. And then on the x-axis, we basically have rovers versus sitters. So which of those two will have higher fitness, the rover or the sitter, if food is abundant?
The sitters.
Yes, Sarah, very good. Exactly right. So the sitter would have a higher fitness, right? Because they don't waste energy trying to find a new food batch. Food is abundant. Why go and search for new food? Exactly right. And the reverse is obviously true when food is scarce. Then the rover will have a higher fitness. So this is a good example of where we can actually, in a controlled environment, we can actually manipulate food availability, and we see direct differences in expression of allele frequencies, which is evolution. That's the classic definition. Changing allele frequency in a population over time is the definition of evolution. And this is an exact example. We know the mechanism, two alleles, and we know the evolutionary adaptiveness or advantage. And that's basically controlled by food availability, ecology. All right, so this is the first example. On to another one here. So some of our faculty here work with this cute little zebra finches. You can see them in all the pet stores. They actually come from Australia. They're really cute. And so the zebra finch belongs to a bird called sort of a group of birds called songbirds, which we have plenty of them around here too, like the mockingbirds that you might have in your backyard, or the American robin that are singing right now. So they actually can sing, right? And we know now the mechanism of singing. The singing is basically how air is going through the syrinx, and that produces basically the song. And so birds actually have 4 lungs, so they can actually fly and sing at the same time because they have 4 lungs. Good luck for us to do that, right? After a while, we can't run fast anymore because we need more air to sing. But they can do both at once thanks to having 4 lungs. So we know the mechanism, right? It has to do with musculature in the syrinx, and that produces then the song. We also know in birds, for another type of mechanism, that some behavior is actually influenced by sex hormones, like testosterone in the case of birds here. So most birds actually don't sing outside the breeding season. And then come early spring, there's a change in daylight length, which then elicits a whole sequence of hormones that ultimately in the gonads release then testosterone, which then affects the musculature in the syrinx, which then affects the song behavior. So it's both a sort of a skeletal muscular mechanism as well as hormonal. And a lot of behaviors are controlled by hormones. So that's the causation. And then in the development, these birds actually need to learn the song from their dad. So here's a son, looks pretty drab, just born, and it will actually learn the song from its father. And so very important. It's actually kind of cute when you hear these young males come out of the nest, they try to sing, and it sounds like a young male human with changing the voice. Same thing with the zebra finches. And so they actually learn the song from that. What's really cool about it is in some species, that's very plastic. So they learn sort of the elements of song in their first year, but then if they move away and breed somewhere else, there might actually be a local dialect. So they need to learn that dialect before they can actually attract the female. So if you listen to birds here in Williamsburg and I go to Charlottesville, I can actually tell you this thing's slightly different because it's a local dialect like we humans have. So in some of these species, there's plasticity. And again, that goes back to the development. So they learn it first initially from their dad, and then there's plasticity by learning the local dialect. So that's the how question, right? Causation and development. And then what is the why question? So here's a male and a female. Clearly, song is a sexually selected trait. Males that have a richer song in terms of the song structure or the motifs included in the song have higher reproductive rate. We also know that the neural circuitry, so this is now the evolution, is found in the ancestors in birds, and that we can trace that back more than 100 million years ago. So clearly, the song behavior has always been an important behavior in birds, and we can trace it back to really ancient ancestors. So that's the evolution of it. So in summary, then, basically for the fitness, the individual fitness increases as the song complexity increases, because that increases the attractiveness in males. And we can go back to this adaptive state graphs again. So in here on the x-axis, we have the complexity of the song, and on the y-axis, we have the fitness, and in this case, reproductive success, and there's a positive association. So that's been found in many birds. They actually learn they mimic other species to include more syllabi in their vocabulary of their song, and thereby have higher fitness because they can attract another and more females. So this is a good example where we now have both the causation, there's learning behavior involved, we know about the fitness, and then lastly, we know about the evolution, that song behavior can be traced back to an ancient ancestor. Any questions about Tinbergen's 4 questions? I'm sure you guys did not cover this in high school because I didn't have it. Good, you learned something new, huh? Didn't come just for nothing here. So, let's do a participation poll here. So, can somebody tell me what is approximate explanation for singing in male zebra finches? Any thoughts? Input?
They have the correct mechanical structure to do it. I forget that word. It was like an S word. And then they also learn it from like their parents or their father, or it can change if they go to a new location.
Very good, Elizabeth. You named it. Yeah, the structure you can look up, right? It's the siring, so don't worry about it. You can look that up. But you're absolutely right. Those are both proximate explanations for singing behavior. Very good. How about the ultimate? So the ultimate is the why question, right?
I guess the more complex the song is, the more attractive they seem to the females.
That's exactly right. Yeah. So the more rich the song is, the more likely they will actually find a partner. Exactly right. And then the evolution is basically how far can we trace song behavior back to ancestors? How common is that behavior? And in birds, clearly, it's very common. Yes. So do you think humans have proximate and ultimate explanations for their behavior? How about, attractiveness in humans? Is it the bank account? The checkbook that you have, how thick it is? Not anymore, right? Now it's Bitcoins, right? Or something else, not the checkbook anymore. I'm sure there are factors too. I guarantee you that in humans they exist too. I'm just bringing up a joke now to enlighten this lecture a little bit. Money certainly could play a role, right? The resources, more secure future. Yeah. it's always good to sort of branch out into human behavior, especially when we look at selection of partners. There are some classic examples how human males change their behavior depending on, whether there are females around or not, or women around. Sorry, I'm a biologist. I use those interchangeably. So yeah, clearly works with humans too. So one more example here. This is a cool one. So this one actually I was involved in at the initial stage of this experiment when I did my postdoc at the University of Washington in Seattle. So we had a hypothesis. Basically, we observed that when we band a crow, right? We have crows here, the birds that you see all over the place. When you capture them and you band them and we usually put some color bands on it so we can recognize the individuals, and you let them go again. As soon as you walk near them, they start scolding at you. They really are mad because they had a bad experience, right? With being handled by a human, which is almost kind of like a predation event. And so we thought, can we actually look at this? Is this really the case just for individuals that are caught? Or do crows actually communicate that to each other? Do they learn from each other? Oh, by the way, watch out, this Loy guy here, not good, is back as a bad guy because he banded me. And so we did this actually. So we had students wearing this horrible mask. Don't ask me how my advisor came up with this mask. So they had to wear this mask while banding crows. And the way you band crows is actually really funny. You actually put out Cheetos. They really love Cheetos. So you put out Cheetos, and we have a little cannon net that actually you can, there's a box that allows you to basically release the net, and you can be 50 meters away so crows will not see you. And then you go and band the crow. So the person that banded the crow basically had that bad person mask on. And then we also had grad students just walking around with a hat on or not to see if that makes a difference. And then basically observed the behavior. Does the crow actually attack the person or not? And so we've done this, and what we found is actually really fascinating. So we found, first of all, there's horizontal transmission. So that means any individuals, related or not, will actually learn from an individual that had a bad experience with this masked person. So they actually learn despite not ever being caught. They now scold at that bad person. So there's learning horizontally within a group of crows. What's even more fascinating is that actually the young of parents who know that this person is bad also learn that from the parents, and that's what's called vertical transmission. So it actually goes across generations. And so not only do crows learn from each other, but the children also learn from their parents. And interestingly enough, if the generation span reaches about 2 generations or so, that behavior is no longer expressed. So it kind of gets forgotten, and it needs to be rejuvenated again, right? If that bad person will come back again and capture one of the crows, that they would then learn again, reinforcing, oh, this is bad person. We need to scold that person. So there's definitely some loss of memory, if you will, if there's not a reinforcement, right? By a crow being captured within a given area. So this is a classic example of how incredibly intelligent some of these organisms are. And they have learning behaviors like we do. They can communicate that like we do. And like our children learn from their parents, so do the crow babies. And that's just really amazingly fascinating. So this study has then been basically expanded to look at which brain structures actually are activated, whether a crow sees a bad person versus a good person, so to speak. And there are different parts of the hypothalamus that are activated. So really fascinating. So behavioral ecology can go from cells all the way up to ecosystems. So in a nutshell then, behaviors are complex. They can either be innate or learned. I hope I convinced you that even a brainless worm is not clueless, right? And then we use Tinbergen's 4 questions, the hows and the whys, to explain the mechanism of a behavior versus its evolutionary significance. And we asked proximate questions. So how's a behavior orchestrated and initiated, and how does it evolve in the lifespan of an individual? And then we looked at the ultimate questions, the current function, and the evolution of behavior from sort of more of a phylogenetic perspective, looking at the ancestors, the shared ancestors of a given species. So with that, I'm happy to entertain any questions, but I hope this gives you some insight of how we teach at William & Mary. This is pretty typical, very interactive. We have in this lecture, we have many more in-class exercises that we do. And quite often, at least when I teach, I'll bring in examples from the primary literature that are not included in your textbook. Because you already read the textbook or you already read the papers, why should I regurgitate that again, right? We can build on it, but not to just bring the same thing up again, the same graphs again. That's pretty boring. I would be bored as a student. So yeah, hopefully this helps you to see what we do at William & Mary. So I'm looking forward to your questions. Thank you. So what kind of majors are you interested in pursuing if you were to come to William & Mary, which I hope you do? Yes, Sarah, just feel free to speak up.
Oh, sure. Well, first of all, thank you so very much. This is really interesting. But I'm not entirely sure what major I would like, but I'm thinking about maybe biology or French.
Excellent. Good for you. There's actually a tradition at William & Mary that a lot of students are double majors, which when I came to William & Mary, I was totally perplexed. I barely could finish my own major in zoology. So, but students here are so bright, they do 2 majors. And I had several students who did a foreign language in biology. So that's a very, I wouldn't say it's common, but it's definitely in my lab, I had at least one student who did that. Yeah, very good. Yeah, just take classes. If you're not sure yet which major you want to pursue, take some introductory courses and see, you know, if you get up in the morning, are you looking forward to reading assignment, or is it something you kind of push aside and think, I might do this later? Anyone else? Do you have any questions about teaching or research, undergraduate research, right, which we are famous for?
I had a question. Do you know why the brood X cicadas all like come out at one time rather than?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And why is it 13 years and 17 years, and why some of them are every year? This goes back to sort of the same hypothesis that we put forward with the beech nuts, right? So basically saturating the predators with way too many beech nuts in this case, so cicadas. So they can't keep up. They can't make any huge dent into the next generation. And so it's really that sort of saturation approach. Yes, some of them will be eaten, but there's a high probability that a lot of them will survive. As opposed to if there were only, a couple thousands every year, predators could then key in on that and basically there will be fewer individuals making it to adulthood. So that's sort of the notion of timed breeding events, where yes, predators will eat some, but they can't keep up. It's just too many. Good question. There's still an enigma. Why is it 13 years? Why is it 17 years? I mean, it's just absolutely amazing that these, cicadas have time clocks, right? They must have a time clock to know when is it, because it's not environmentally induced. It's pretty much every 13 or 17 years. This is phenomenal. I still, to my knowledge, and I'm not an entomologist, but I think we still don't understand how that's actually the how question. We don't know. So there's a lot of unknowns in biology, which makes it exciting, right?
I was wondering what you research in your lab.
Great question, Gracie. So we look at how humans change the landscape. So we're really interested in fragmentation of forests in Virginia and how that affects tick-borne diseases. So we know by fragmenting the forest, there's more edge. And if there's more edge, there's actually more hosts of ticks. So the Lone Star tick that you might know of really depends on white-tailed deer. White-tailed deer love edge because there's more food there. So by actually urbanizing areas causing increasing edge, we're actually creating perfect environments for more deer and therefore more ticks and likely more tick-borne diseases. Along with that, more deer means that the deer need to get food and they eat all the shrubs in the forest, which then has an effect on the bird population. All those birds that breed in shrubs, in many of the forests that we now have in Virginia, they're gone because there's no breeding ground for them anymore. And that's directly due to overbrowsing by deer. We also look at frog populations. So how much area does there need to be conserved around a breeding pond for frogs to actually successfully breed? And we found that the frog species respond to 300, 400, maybe even 1,000 feet around what happens around their breeding pond. Actually, some of them are even 2,000 feet because they cannot stay in the ponds for too long. Otherwise, they get eaten by fish. I guarantee you that's what the largemouth bass love are eating frogs. So they breed and get out of there and they go back up into the forest. So if you actually cut down the forest around the pond, you might actually lose the frog population. Not because the breeding ground is bad, it's because they don't have an area to go to. So that's a big question that we're looking into in my lab too. And we found a way to actually individually tag the frogs and be able to find them again. And it's a similar technology that you use for finding skiers that are buried in an avalanche. So skiers now have in their jacket collar, they have little plates stitched in. And first responders have a machine that sends out a radar signal that then bounces off that metal plate. And that allows you, so there's no battery involved. That allows you then to find the victim. And we use the same approach with frogs because the metal plate can be fairly small. And so it's not too heavy. It doesn't disturb the movement pattern of the frog. So that's a big research. And then I'm generally just interested in biodiversity and how that's affected by human landscape fragmentation. So that's pretty much the research we do. So lots of field work, lots of math and statistics, and then also geographical information systems. I have about 12 students in my lab, and some semesters 16. So we're a big family. It's fun. Yeah, I think that's a big plus at William & Mary is the undergraduate research. Yes, you can find that at other universities too, right? But if you go to a larger university, it's a probability sum game again. There's a lower, likelihood that you will find a place in a lab. Whereas at William & Mary, it's sort of the, I wouldn't call it a must, but I think we did a survey, about 60% of all the biology students are in the lab. And then if you're really interested in research, you can actually get credits for research, which replaces one class. And if you do an honor student, you will actually do 3 class equivalents in terms of research. So a lot of all the undergraduates actually come out with publications. And that just gets you in a totally different sphere when it comes down to going to grad school, right? Because you know what you're doing already. So biology students are very successful in going to really, really good labs, really well-known universities here for their PhD or master's program. I'm not trying to sell it to you guys. I'm not a salesperson. I just tell you what it is here. So you need to make your decision at the end. But I do think if you're interested in research, I came from a large university, University of Washington, had, I think 38,000 undergrads at that time. And I was fortunate enough to actually do research, but it was only because there was a postdoc I approached, and we had similar interests, and it was and so that's how I got into research. But I think at University of Virginia, I've heard it's harder. You can still do it, but it's just there are many more students there, right? So biology courses, the intro course is perceived as a weed out class. You might hear that from upperclassmen, and I just want to tell you that is not true because we're not curving the grades. right? If it's a readout class, you would actually curve the grade. So even if you get a 92, that doesn't mean you get an A then. You could get a B plus because there are, 10% of the students got 97 and 98. So we don't do that. No, we don't. We actually adhere to 98% and above as an A. So if you get that, you're guaranteed to get an A. So no readout class. Just wanted to make sure because I hear that from a lot of students. So do you have any other questions? Have you guys had a chance to come see the campus? It's pretty. And as an ecologist, I love it because there are lots of trees here, right? So I feel pretty home here. Yeah. All right. I'm happy to stay on if you have more questions, but feel free to bail out. It's so beautiful out there. Go enjoy it. So I wish you the best of luck making a decision. It's good to have options. And the Monroe Fellowship program is excellent. Yeah, I would seriously think about that. It definitely comes with a lot of added benefits to it. So you already get research funding, right, to do research. And I think you have first steps in enrolling too, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong on that, but I would read the fine print. There's definitely some benefits in that fellowship. So congratulations on getting that. All right.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely. It was nice to meet everyone. So enjoy the rest of your, do you have spring break right now or? No? Not good. We don't have it either. We have wellness days. So today's actually a wellness day where students, we're not deciding anything. They just have a day where they can catch up and go for a walk or a bike ride or whatever they do. Yeah. I do miss spring break. It is nice to have a whole week of, no lectures. It's nice for faculty and students. I think we missed it all. I can tell the students are kind of running on fumes. But next fall should be better. I'm hopeful. Yeah. All right. I don't know if nope, he already left. So it's up to us. If you have questions, feel free to send me an email. You can find me. My email is actually, I can put in the chat. It should be pretty easy. There you go. Pretty simple. My last name, my first name, M, and then just at wilhelmandmary.edu. Yeah, well, it was nice to meet everyone. And good luck with your decision and have a good time. All right. See ya. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. Take care. Bye-bye.
Take care.
Bye.